We're certainly coming into winter in a real way right now. It's been mild for the last few days and weeks. Seasonal average, maybe a little bit warmer than average. And I was just looking at the weather this morning, and we're gonna be coming into a pretty nice little cold snap, single digits overnight, coupled with snow. And so in the chicken yard, there's some work that I've been learning over the years that kind of needs to happen in advance of a real winter hit, for this composting system to continue working well and for our hens to be really comfortable. I'm going to share notes with you on what I've learned and how we're going about that, so stick around. Having enough bulked out carbon and composting elements staged from the fall until now, we're still in a good way for our chickens. Once they come out and do a little bit of turning, pile up the old sprout mountain, as we talked about in greater detail in another video. For now, they're still having access to some nice compost. There's some great worms in there and sprouts. But as we get closer to single digits, and especially if we get heavy snow with then very cold weather, these sorts of areas out in the landscape become less accessible to our hens. And so if I don't move a lot of this material to be staged right in front of or even into their high tunnel in advance of that weather, we'll be scrambling when it gets cold, and so will our hens. It almost feels miraculous that with icy, crusty ground, you can hear it with the hens' feet walking on the snow and ice, how warm and beautiful it actually still is here, considering we are in winter months. But I don't want to push my luck. This winter run, the 4-panel cattle panel high tunnel, very, very simple, pretty shoddily made, but it's held up a whole winter, and now it's been working for the beginning of this winter. This really is the key to our hens being comfortable and still productive in the composting context. So what I'd like to do is spend a little bit of time this morning getting things organized. You can see our hens are working on a fresh deer carcass there. It's one of the most delightful things for our little dinosaurs, is to have access to meat and fat and blood. It seems kind of crazy, but here's also some milk, which I'll talk about in a moment. But for now, I need to spend a little bit of time and kind of prep this high tunnel space so that it can accommodate some fresh material. So as we get into the cold, there's tons of activity and comfort for our hens. The theme to this work is every day, ideally a few times a day, to take a hay fork and to focus digging out the material from the center walkway and piling it up on either side. And so this way the compost piles are up on the edges. They can focus and intensify and heat. You can, I'm sure, see the steam coming off of there. And this way the hens also can then kick the material back down into the pathway. You can see it actively happening. And so then there's the opportunity for them to turn the compost from two sides, and for me and Sasha to be able to walk through the middle. The thing we're also learning is that if we get the pile, we find areas where it's particularly hot, we can use that as a radiator to keep drinking water thawed out, milk nice and warm, and their soaked sprouts really enjoyably warm. So let me work on that next. It's also an opportunity to really be checking in with what the compost is doing. You can probably sense the steam. It's very warm in here now, and I can smell what state the compost is in. And if it hits me with a really sulfury or ammonia or somewhat otherwise unpleasant smell, I know that we're either not turning it enough or we're not adding enough carbon. Right now it just smells like really rich forest steam, if you could imagine what that's like. And so what I'm doing is flattening out a little area here, and I'll put a tray to receive some food for them. As we get colder and colder, little trays of milk like this. We have a friend who has a really amazing farm where we barter for older milk for our hens. This would freeze up rock solid. Overnight it got frosty, but when we get down to 10 degrees, this would be a brick. Little farm hack, 5-gallon bucket cut either with a hand saw or a reciprocating saw. Makes for a really nice container for chickens, very low cost. With this mesh, it makes it less likely for them to kick it over, and they're not as likely to scratch material in. So we flatten this out. We know there's heat really coming up from here, and so now we've got a way to thaw this milk out and even make it warm so our hens can enjoy some warm, raw, fat-filled milk on an icy day. As it gets colder and colder and there's less overall area for our hens to work in and find worms and pill bugs and the like, the need for high caloric density, some grains, actually increases. And so what we've done here, this is kind of our daily routine now, is we take a 5-gallon bucket, fill it with whole viable seed from our local friends who have an organic flour milling operation. What we've been doing lately is we pour old milk over it and some whey, in other words, some nutrient-dense fluids, maybe even stock that Sasha's made for stews for us, some of the old stock elements, fill it with water and let it soak overnight. And now we've got this really rich, nutrient-loaded material that we can use for our hens. See that rich broth that these seeds have been soaking in. Sunflower seeds and oat and wheat. Nice big mix. Pretty much all bartered for. Some purchased, but not much. And they'll hammer at this for a bit. What's nice is because it's in metal containers, we can lay those metal containers on the hot compost when we need to thaw this out or warm it. And because we're putting these containers in the areas where the composting is happening, there's really no waste. If they kick material out, it'll just land on leaves and wood chips and other things that we want them to continue to sprout anyway. So as long as this material is on the composting pipeline, any waste just is benefit later on. It's sprouts waiting to happen. When we're just soaking the grains in straight water, rainwater in the summer, once they soak for a day or two, we just pour them out over the leaves. But because they have so much fat and protein and nutrient in that soaking water, we'd like to keep it in the trough so they can get the most benefit from it. It's not a big deal to take the extra step and put it on the hot compost, so all today there'll be a little radiant warmth going into this. So soaked sprouts with raw, local, organic, fat-laden milk and whey, warmed on a bed of sprouts and decomposing leaves in the winter. We have a number of hens that are much older. We'll call this the retirement community here. And as it gets colder, snowier, icier, it's a lot harder for them to come out and feel comfortable and do the work that the other hens do. So putting a little offering in the coop is really nice, I feel like, for the hens that can't really make it out on these cold days. We just make sure we don't put it under the roosting bars. So for those hens that want to take a nap during the day, they're not going to poop in the food for the other friends. And since this is a deep litter method, in this space, any spillage in here will tend to sprout and become part of the nutrient cycling in this space as well. So now I need to get on with the real work of this morning, which is to bulk out or bring a lot of this material that has a tremendous amount of worms and sprouts and warmth in it and focus it closer to that high tunnel so we're a little more secure as we get colder. You get the idea. Throughout the day, I'll try to bring a few more wheelbarrow loads over here. By having these hay bales on either side, we're blocking the wind and heavy snow accumulation a little bit, giving the hens some shelter, insulating. And by bringing all this so close to the beginning of the tunnel, they can work on it before it moves in. Once it's in the tunnel, it's a little harder for them to turn, but definitely still very doable. And now we've got things lined up where we've got soaked grain in full fat raw milk, fresh meat, more grain, and then just straight full fat milk, all on a warm bed of compost, keeping things thawed. I feel like the warmer and more moist the food is as we go into this time, obviously the more pleasure the hens get, but from a practical level, it keeps them warmer, so they need less food. This isn't just about coddling and fanciness by any stretch. This is about pure, straight practicality and treating very hardworking and respectable beings with things that are in line with the other elements and goals that we have, not at some ethical expense or energetic or financial expense, just working with systems to treat our workers with respect and appreciation. And as we get down towards single digits, the elements are set up to keep things thawed so that 60 plus pairs of little garden forks can micro-turn compost all day, every day. And by spring, we'll have many, many cubic yards of shredded, aged, and incredibly nutrient-dense compost in exchange for treating our friends with some deep respect and really enjoying seeing them have a good life. We get a lot of joy in this as well. And if I don't rush the process of moving it all in one fell swoop, so do a couple wheelbarrows now, a few after lunch, a few before dinner, then the hens can work through all these areas where we dug in. There's the negative space and these gaps that are open that also have worms and sprouts out here. So we'll chip away at it rather than pushing and making it one big brutal physical labor. I think it's a really important point I want to offer up here as well. I just recently had someone call with questions about chicken composting, and they seemed very daunted at getting this all going. It seemed so complex to them. They had so many questions about, well, what about the ratios of wood chips to straw, and can't the chickens get hurt if the wood chips have splinters, and what if the straw isn't the right type or if it has weed seeds in it? And I very much appreciate and understand that sentiment of I want to get it right. But I think it's really important to say we did not design this from the outset in any way, shape, or form. We had a rough idea that we knew we wanted to feed our chickens with as much compost as possible and have them help us create compost while living a good life and not spend a ton of money on it. And the design evolved from that based on what sort of resources we could find, asking folks, is there old hay, is there old wood chips, or are there old wood chips? What sort of old meat products or milk products might you have that we can trade with? And over time, the system, in some ways, evolved itself. So the thing I want to say is that there's no master plan that has to happen in order to get started on this or anything, in my opinion. We don't have training. We didn't have a formal and full idea of how to go about it. I would not have described this system in the way it is today if I had tried to describe what it would look like in 5 years when we first started. And I definitely suspect this system will look different in a few years as we continue to learn from it and with it. So I hope you all that are on the edge of starting to raise chickens more with compost feel empowered to do it, that if we can, in a fumbling way, figure it out as we go along, you absolutely can too. Hope you're all staying warm and your hardworking friends are feeling comfortable as we get colder and colder if you're in a similar climate to us. Thanks for watching. Chicken TV time.